Hello, Unique Beauties, and welcome back to the How to See Your Beauty the Way God Sees Your Unique Beauty Summit. I'm your host, Jamie, and I'm so excited today to introduce to you our today's speaker. Her name is Lindsey R. Dennis. Say hi, Lindsey.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
So let me tell you a little bit about Lindsey. So Lindsey is a writer, and she's been writing for the past 2 decades. And it has been in the last 5 years that she's invited others into her journalistic style of writing through her blog, which tells the story of her journey through her life and the death of her first 2 children. She writes authentically and with rawness and vulnerability that draws others into her story, but to the raw places of their own story where grace and hope need to be discovered. People in many walks of life have related to the hope and disappointment found in Lindsey's story, what to do with lost dreams and trusting God when life doesn't make sense. So Lindsey lives in the great sunshine state of Florida, where she and her husband, Kevin, serve on the staff of Crew and help train and equip college students to know and walk with Jesus for a lifetime. Lindsey and her husband have been married for 6 years. They have 4 children, Sophie and Dasa. Did I get it? Okay, I just want to make sure.
Got it. You got it. Yeah.
Dasa. They have gone to live with Jesus. And then Jaden and Briella, now with them. So thank you, Lindsey.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. I'm sorry I was struggling with the names there.
It's okay. I mean, everyone has asked me. We chose some unique ones.
So yeah, I wanted to dive into your story. So why don't we go ahead and do that to start out the interview. So a while back, you shared on your blog an unfolding story of hope and loss, and it got so much attention. The first week it had thousands of views, and within a couple of years, you had 1.5 million views on your blog. Do you mind sharing briefly what happened and why you think your story had so much impact on so many?
Yeah, I think like many people, when as you journey through life, life takes turns that you don't anticipate and maybe never ever anticipated. And I was 33 at the time, and my husband and I had just gotten married. We got married older in life, and we weren't sure if we would get married. I was at a point in my life where I didn't know, am I going to find a man? Will there be a man for me? Can I trust God if there isn't? And Kevin, my husband, shows up on the scene and sweeps me off my feet. And we get married a couple years later, and we were very eager to start a family because we were older. And so 6 months into marriage, I was pregnant. We were very excited, very hopeful, very in that newlywed bliss stage, and just excited that our family was forming, and unsure if that would be our story. And so we, did normal early pregnancy things and took photos, and were, going and registering for baby stuff. And when I was 20 weeks pregnant, we went into a routine ultrasound. And the only thing that I was hoping we would not find out was the sex of the baby, because we wanted to be surprised. And so we go into the ultrasound, and the sonographer is looking around, and she gets very quiet, and she leaves the room and comes back with my doctor, who proceeds to tell me that they can't seem to find the skull of my baby. I had no idea what that meant. Had no idea, had never heard of anything like that. They sent us quickly to a high-risk doctor. And at that point, Kevin and I were just in total disarray. Like, everything just crumbled down. We didn't know what it meant, but we knew that it was not good. And went to our high-risk doctor, and he proceeded to tell us that our daughter had what was called anencephaly. And it's where her skull had not formed, her brain had not formed, and therefore her skull had not formed completely. And she could live in my womb, but she would not be able to survive outside of it. There was zero chance of survival. And so obviously we were in total shock, and it was like all my dreams for this little child just came crashing to a halt, and all my dreams for how my family would form. And Kevin and I were in that room, and we knew that we saw this precious life. And I don't know if you can hear my dog barking in the background. But we saw this precious life, and I knew that we needed to cherish her life and just celebrate her for as long as God gave us her. And so we decided that we would carry her to term, and that we would just celebrate her every week. And of course, as you know, as news got out of our baby's condition and what we were walking, people had many questions. Friends wanted to come alongside of us. And I had decided that I was going to start this blog actually before this even happened. And I just had never posted anything. So my first post was basically the story of what was unfolding for us. And it was, in a lot of ways, just me processing what I was experiencing and how I was navigating even how I viewed God and in this story, and how we were going to trust God for this little life and celebrate this little life. And I wanted it to be a place where I could send people to, you know, if they have questions, like, okay, you can go to the blog. I mean, I want to answer them, but you know, you're in a place of deep grief, and it's really hard to engage with people and answer questions. And people have a lot of the same questions, which I wanted to respond to, but I just didn't have the emotional capacity to respond to everyone. So that I started this blog for that reason. And also because I had come across a quote by a woman named Ruth Still years earlier. And she said, I don't even know who this woman is, but I found this quote in a book by Elizabeth Elliot. And she said, if my life is broken when given to Jesus, it's because pieces will feed a multitude, while a loaf will satisfy only a little lad. And I remember praying, God, if my life is going to be broken, I don't want it to just be for myself to be healed or to experience you, but I want it to be a piece of how you offer you and me to other people. That the pieces of my life, that you can even use the brokenness to produce fruit. And so part of the blog was to say, this is my offering. I'm broken. I am in pain. I am anticipating the loss of my first daughter. And I am anticipating navigating pregnancy, knowing that I'm going to lose her, and also wanting to celebrate her life. And I am in deep grief, and I'm wrestling with God, and I'm wrestling with who he is. And I want to just invite people into that journey, that they would know and see authentic Christianity of a life where things don't go perfectly, but perhaps they could kind of peek in and see, here's what it looks like to wrestle. Here's what it looks like to trust God. Here's what it looks like to invite community into that. And so I began to blog the story of us walking through my pregnancy with, we named her Sophia Kyla, called her Sophie. And friends of ours gathered around. They actually created a secret Facebook group. And we didn't know about this until much later, where they gathered people to help us celebrate her life every week. We didn't know if we would make it to full term, if she would come early. And so we just wanted to celebrate every week that God gave us her. And so every week on Thursdays, someone would knock on our door or tell us to keep that day open. And they would just help us celebrate and create these memories with her in my womb. They gave us gift cards to go to a really fancy restaurant for a daddy-daughter date. And so my husband wrote a note to her and pinned a corsage on my belly. And we live in Orlando, Florida, and go to Disney. And so we went to Disney and just ate at a really nice restaurant and had a little scavenger hunt with her. And so we made these really precious memories, these really sweet moments. And then again, Disney, I have friends who are closely connected. We're closely connected to princesses at Disney and many of the characters. And so they organized this meet and greet with princesses where friends of mine met me at Magic Kingdom. I had a t-shirt that said Queen Lindsey in the corner and Princess Sophia Kyla on my belly, and a little yellow tutu that perfectly went around my my belly. So it kind of looked like she was wearing it. And Kevin had a shirt that said King Kevin. We met the princesses. We had VIP seating for the parade. And I felt as if I was experiencing Disney with my daughter. People just looked at my belly. People said, "Hi, Sophie." The fairy godmother sprinkled pixie dust over her. And, you know, it was like a small thing of, you know, amidst all the things I was anticipating losing, there's these little things of like, gosh, I would love to see my little girl enjoy the magic of Disney. I would love to see my little girl go on her first daddy-daughter date. I would love to bake cookies with her. Friends gave us supplies to bake cookies. And so all these things that we did with her in my womb, I documented. And then I shared with whoever was listening. And I shared my pain in that journey, but I also shared this hope. And honestly, so much of the hope came because people came alongside of us and reminded us of hope and reminded us of who God is and that he's with us. And we're a very tangible expression of his presence with us, that it gave me courage to lean into him when it was really easy to wallow in despair and sit in my sorrow and sit in the pain of what was coming, instead of experience some of the joys of what God was giving in that place of pain. You know, I think that when you hear hard news or something hard happens, it's so easy to just anticipate how hard it will be. And we forget that when we walk journeys that are hard, sometimes and often God will intervene and he will infuse joy in places where joy should not exist. And he will infuse life in places where life should not exist, because that's what he does, is that he breathes life into dead places. And that's what he began to do in our journey with Sophie. All I could see when we got that diagnosis was, how am I going to do this? But I'm going to choose in faith to do it because I believed it was the right thing to do. And I believed it was something that God had called me to do, that it was the story he had asked me to live. It wasn't the story that I would have chosen, but it was the one he was asking me to write, to walk. And could I trust him that he would reveal his goodness, even when it didn't feel very good? Could I trust that he would reveal his resurrection life, even when it felt like I was just falling apart? And when he began to do that through these celebrations, through his word, through reminding me of heaven and of hope, and that this world is not my home. There really has been very few seasons in my life where my heart has been more fixated on eternal things than walking through this journey with my daughter, Sophie, where I was reminded that there is more going on than what I can see. And I feel like God gave me a little glimpse of that, and how he brought people into our life, and even just how our story expanded and God used it in the lives of other people. You know what? So that first week when I wrote that first blog post and I saw thousands of hits, and I'm like, who are these people who are tuning in to what I'm about to journey? And I had prayed before I even had kids, before I was even married and knew whether I would have kids. I had prayed, God, would you allow my kids to bring greater glory to your name than I ever could? And I, saw it's not about numbers, but there is something about watching, a large amount of people following your story that makes you kind of like wonder what is going on that I can't see. And God reminded me of that prayer. And he reminded me that, Lindsey, like, I will answer your prayers and I will do a work in and through your life, and it won't look like what you think, but trust me. And so that just continued, and people started to tune in, and I think they just were wondering, I think some were curious, like, how could I carry this little baby? And some more just fell in love with Sophie, and they never seen her before, never knew her, never held her, and yet fell in love with her and her story. And I think people were drawn to, who is God in the midst of loss, and what does he do in the life of a believer when faced with pain? I want to share this is probably one of my funnest stories of my time with Sophie. But my brother works in the music industry, and I really love boy bands. And I really wanted to take her to a boy band concert. And so at the time, New Kids on the Block, 98 Degrees, and Boys to Men were in town doing their this tour. And my brother had connection to someone who worked with 98 Degrees. And I was like, oh, it would be so much fun if we could go to that concert. So he found a way to get us VIP tickets where we got to have a meet and greet with 98 Degrees. And actually there's a part in the show where they bring up 4 women and they serenade them. So I had a shirt, my husband and I made a shirt for myself that had earphones over my belly, and it said, I've got a fever, and it's 98 degrees on my belly. Shameless. So they serenaded me, which was, it's a little awkward, but it was just like, it was so much fun. I have to say, I know the words to every song that Boyz II Men sings, and it was a night infused with so much joy and life. I don't know if I shed a single tear that night. And I just was so thankful. I look back even now and I think of my journey with Sophie, and it just brings me so much joy in life. And that to me is even astounding because I miss her so much. And I would give anything to have her in my arms today. Yeah. And yet God met us in that season of pain, and he allowed us to experience just joy in life with our firstborn daughter, even knowing that we would have to say goodbye to her. And she was born, I was 42 weeks and 2 days pregnant when she was born. And I had a C-section, which we were hoping that I wouldn't have to have. And yet even in that, God was orchestrating the doctors and the nurses who were in that place, who were with us, who were in the delivery room, and she was born alive, which we didn't know if she would be born alive. And I heard her cry, and she lived for 10 precious hours. And then I said goodbye to her. And those moments were the most heart-wrenching moments of my life. And yet I sensed that God was with me in that, and that he is one who knows sorrow. And I tasted a little bit of the sorrow of Christ in the loss of my daughter, and him meeting me in my tears. And I continued to journal and write my grief and share that with the world as we began to step into the pain of saying goodbye and no longer anticipating loss, but experiencing it. Still hopeful for how God would form our family. And at that point, I mean, I don't even know how many people have been following our story, but we had opportunities to share Sophie's story on more national levels and in interviews and on the news. And it was amazing to see how her life was giving hope to other people even after her death. And I will say that the moment she was born, I had fallen in love with her in my womb, but the moment she was born, it was like this explosion of love poured out of my heart. And, she was so broken, and I had prayed God would heal her, and he didn't. And yet I loved her so much because she was mine. And it was this taste of God's love for me and for us, that we come into this world broken, and yet he loves us so much for all that we bring to the table and all that we don't, because we are his. And Sophie's life was so many things, but I think she showed us so much of the great love of God and the hope that we have in Christ. And we were eager, after we lost her, we were eager to trust God to still form our family, that she would have little siblings, even that would know her. There was no reason genetically for us to believe that this could happen again. And so 6 months later, we were pregnant, and we were able to find out earlier whether or not the baby that I was carrying would have a similar condition or anything else. And so at 12 weeks pregnant, we went into our doctor's office and found out that our baby did not have anencephaly, but had what was called a crania. And it's very similar. It's where her brain had formed, but her skull had not. but it would play out the same way. And I have to say, for all the hope and joy that I experienced in our story with Sophie, amidst so many tears and so much pain, I sensed that God was absent in that room when we found out that we were going to lose another baby. I think most people recognize that there is sorrow and suffering in this world, and that no one is immune to it. And I think we probably all have our idea of like what is acceptable pain to have in our life, and what is, the unanticipated kind, or the kind that, I don't know, we're like, okay, really wrestle with why this is in our life. And for me, when we walked through our story with Sophie, I recognized that I was not immune to suffering. And so there was, in a way, I accepted it, and accepted that, okay, this is the chapter. I didn't think it would happen so early in our life that we would experience such pain, but God, I will trust you. And so then when we found out that we were going to lose our second daughter, I felt a sense of abandonment from God, that, okay, I understand like walking through like one loss, but two in the same way. And at the time, my sister was pregnant and my best friend was pregnant, and I had thought, this is going to be the pregnancy that is a little bit redemptive. And now I was going to lose another baby, and it felt mean and cruel. And I didn't have the resources that I had to navigate this part of our journey, I guess, with great joy and hope, if you will. We didn't want to do our story with our second daughter, who we named Dasa, which comes from the Hebrew word for Esther, which is Hadassah, and we shortened it to Dasa. And we just knew we needed to do it differently. At that point, it wasn't just the devastation of knowing we were going to lose our second daughter. It was also the realization that maybe we won't have more children, and maybe we can't, and maybe something else is going on. And so this longing, this motherhood that had been awakened in my heart that I wasn't able to do in a very tangible way, was now going to be dashed again. And I was going to anticipate, I know I knew what it was like to lose a child, and I was going to anticipate losing my second daughter. But I continued to write, and I continued to invite people into that pain. And it was a very different journey, and it was a much darker journey, and people continued to follow along. And I think that whereas Sophie taught us so much how to have joy in the midst of pain, our journey with Dasa really taught us how to grieve, and how to sit in our sorrow, and how to learn how to lament, and how to just let it be painful and allow God to meet us in the pain. And I'll have to say that my journey with Dasa, we did so many wonderful things with her. We celebrated family moments. We did family time every week, on a much smaller scale. But I really wrestled with God. And I really wrestle with, God, are you worthy to follow, even if it's just painful, even if there's no promise of what I think is good for me? Will I still follow you? And are you still good and great? And as we anticipated Dasa's arrival, God really met me in that place. And he really began to help me discover treasures in the darkness. And what does it look like to walk with him when it's lonely? Grief is lonely for anyone who has lost someone or something. It's only you have lost that person or that thing. Only you know what it's like for you to walk through that loss. And so it is a lonely experience. And I think people in our culture don't really know how to sit with people in their pain. And we like to find silver linings, and we like to perk someone up, or say at least, or help people see all the good things that are coming out of a hard story. And as we navigated our journey with Dasa, it just was hard. And there was hope, but it was hard. And she was born on November 13th, 2014, and she lived for 12 hours. And we filled the hospital, just like we filled the hospital with Sophie, and people were in the hospital praising God. They were singing worship songs and praying. And one of the things that we prayed was that God's glory would fill that hospital. And I will tell you that I didn't feel it. I didn't feel this astounding presence or his nature, or his love in that hospital room. I was loving having time with my daughter, Dasa. She was born and she lived for 12 hours. And afterwards, I talked with people who were there, who were singing in the lobby. And I remember one of my friends said, Lindsey, it was as if his glory was going throughout these hospital walls. And I just thought, God, you move in such unseen ways sometimes. And you're doing a work that we just don't know the whole story. And you give us glimpses. And sometimes I think the glimpses are just to keep us going in the hard spaces, to remind us, you are a part of a bigger story, of a beautiful tapestry being written for all mankind. And God in his grace has allowed me to rub shoulders with some of the people that have followed our story, that have been impacted by the lives of our girls. And it has reminded me, gosh, Lord, I'm so grateful that I get to have this platform in people's lives. It is in no way the way that I would choose. And if I had to choose, I would choose it differently. But thankfully, I don't know the whole story. And I can trust that God knows, and that he really does turn things for good, cause all things to work together for good. But we don't always see that goodness, and it doesn't always feel good. And so as we journeyed through Dasa, and then Dasa passed away, I stepped into a season of deep pain and deep grief, and really wrestling in a way that I had not wrestled with Sophie. I was now grieving the loss of two children who were born 14 months apart from each other. And so it was very, very heavy. And God had to teach me how to lament and how to bring my pain to him in a way that allowed him to meet me in that place of pain. And, I'm still mourning and grieving. They would be 7 and 6 this year, and I miss them so, so much. And, it's just Mother's Day. And I feel this ache and that tension of this joy of having 2 living children, and this pain of just missing the ones that I've lost. And I feel like it's like Paul speaks of in Romans 8, where he talks about the whole creation groans with longing for the redemption of all mankind, that we sit in the groan, and when we experience pain in our life, we get to taste that groan, and it makes our heart hungry for heaven. And it reminds us that this world is not our home. And I think that is such a good thing, to be reminded that this world is not our home, and that it is okay and good to sit in our pain and to let God meet us there, and lift our eyes to hope, and also lift our eyes to praying that he would redeem this pain soon, and that he would use our pain in the lives of other people as a vehicle of his healing power. And I love to get to speak into people's lives who've lost, and I know that I would not be able to do that if I hadn't walked through my own losses. And so in so many ways, I'm just amazed at how God has and continues to write my story. Yeah. I mean, I could go on and on.
No, this is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I mean, that is some powerful insights of navigating hard times and seeing how God is meeting you at I feel like it's like every minute he's meeting you, because it's so heavy and it's so deep. I feel like you answered a lot of the questions I wanted to ask. I wanted to highlight this because I love this. I read this. I can't remember where I saw it, if it was on your blog or on Amazon, but it was saying that when you talked about the realization of what was happening, you said this experience of infant loss revealed to Dennis how sorrow and suffering are instruments in the hands of God. Okay, so this must be your husband. Okay, sorry about that. So to Dennis how sorrow and suffering are instruments in the hands of God to forge in us a greater joy and hope than one can ever know. This kind of joy can only be discovered when we walk through deep pain of bearing our most precious dreams. I loved that. That
Yeah.
really, really spoke to me. And I love the way you said earlier how people have different losses in life. And for me, one of my biggest losses, it really wrecked my world. Like it really wrecked my world. And for me, I have discovered in my own journey that that very thing that I lost ended up being a gift for me. It ended up being a gift. So when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, that is so true. Like I had an idea of what my life was supposed to look like, but coming out on the other end of everything, I'm like, okay, this is so much better because in my pain, I found Christ. Like I found him, and I would have never known him the way I do now if I did not have him through all of that pain. Like I really sought him. I really experienced him. And so I guess what I wanted to say about that is when it said, I guess it was your husband, he said the kind of joy for anyone right now who's watching this interview and is suffering tremendously from a loss, what kind of words of encouragement can you give them about burying that most precious dream?
Yeah, that quote actually does come from me. And
okay, good.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's hard because, my husband has two last names, Kevin Dennis. So Dennis is a little.
Oh, wait, you're right. Sorry.
Our last name is
That's
like
right.
our first name. I know. No, it's okay.
It's Amazon I got this from. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my favorite books is called Hind's Feet in High Places. And it's an allegory, and it talks about a girl named Much Afraid who wants to go to the high places. And the good shepherd says, I'll take you there. And she's so afraid to go. And he gives her companions called sorrow and suffering. And the whole story is how sorrow and suffering she grows to accept them and even be thankful that they are the companions that the good shepherd gave her to journey to the high places. And once she gets to the high places, they're transformed into joy and peace. And that I've read that book through so many seasons of my life. And especially I read it while I was pregnant with both of my girls. And I have seen, even looking back and even in the midst of it, how sorrow and suffering, they really became my companions for about 3-4 years of my life. And I think that when you're in this season of pain, it often feels as if it will never end. And then maybe it does begin to end and something else happens. And you think, for me, it was like, I can't imagine it getting harder than losing my first daughter. And then it did get harder. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that pain could be so deep and that it could feel so hard. And how do I not run from this pain? We're really good in our culture at running from pain and trying to soothe it or cover it up or not deal with it. And I didn't know if it really would lift. I mean, I have friends tell me, and I think it's helpful to know, like it does, there is light, the darkness does lift, but there's no promise of when, and nobody can tell you when it will lift. But one of the things that, the greatest thing for me in having these companions of sorrow and suffering is tasting the sorrow of Christ. And I think that to truly understand his love, we have to know his sorrow. And the only way to know his sorrow is to walk through sorrow and suffering, to grasp a small amount of what it was that he bore for us on the cross. And that changes you. And that enables you to experience joy, not this like, I'm always laughing, smiling joy, but this inner joy of understanding. You think of Christ and says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. For the joy. he endured suffering. If you look throughout scripture, it's always glory, joy, almost always coincide with suffering or something hard. And you see them together all the time. And I studied that a lot when I was in the place of like deep pain. And I'd go through my Bible and I'd highlight, you know, every place that someone experienced grief, every place there's grief and then there's joy. And I have a little marker for joy and a little marker for grief. And I just began to see all these ways in which the two just go together, this side of heaven. And, you know, I don't know why God chose it that way, but I will say that he wants to meet us in our pain. He doesn't want to just get us through it. He wants to walk with us in it. And not even so that we will get through it, but so that we will know him. One of my life verses is in Philippians, and Paul says, I count everything as lost compared to the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. When I was like 16, I prayed, Jesus, I want to know you like that. I don't know you like that I would consider everything lost compared to knowing you. And you pray, I don't want to say foolish prayers, probably the most smart prayer is when you are the most naive. And that was a very smart prayer that I prayed, not knowing like what it really meant to what the cost was, but also not knowing that the cost was so worth it. And that knowing him is so good and so great. I have never known God like I have through seasons of sorrow and suffering. And that has become my greatest joy in those places of grasping how great and how good and how marvelous and wonderful God is, not because of what he does for me, circumstantial, but simply because of who he is. And when you begin to say, I will follow God no matter what my circumstances, or I will trust you no matter what my circumstances, or I will fight to trust you when my circumstances make me want to think otherwise, you will have peace and joy in your life because he is the rock and he is steadfast when we are not, and he is unwavering when we are not. And his loving kindness never ends when it can feel like we are far from loving kindness or we are far from love or goodness. And there is great joy and peace in that. And I am so grateful to be on the journey of knowing him. And I hope, you know, how old am I? I'm 41 years old today. And, you know, if God gives me 20, 30, 40 more years, 50, I don't know. I hope that in 40 years, I will look back and say, oh, God, I know you more today than I did 40 years ago. God, thank you for all the things you asked me to walk through, that I would know you because you are so worth knowing. And what a great God that he would want to be known rightly, that he would peel back the things in our life that keep us from knowing him. And I think that's what pain does. It reveals pain. And, you know, we all experience pain, and how we deal with pain is so different, but it is a great revealer of our hearts. And pain for me revealed my questions, and it revealed how I viewed God. And it allowed him access to these places in my heart where he wanted to say, yes, that is who I am. And no, that's not who I am, Lindsey. I want you to know me rightly. And I want you to know that I am what it really means that I'm good, what it really means that I'm faithful, what it really means that I'm for you. Like, Lindsey, I see you. I see the longing of your heart. I am not against you because you are losing your first two daughters. I see this pain, and this is actually not how it was supposed to be. There's a promise in Isaiah where it says, in one day, there will not be an infant that lives for just a few days. And I think that for a mother who's lost children, that verse is like, what? He speaks to that. He speaks to that pain. Like, he speaks his promise into that pain, that specific pain. And I just think, unless we experience that pain and we go to him with that pain, we can't know him in that pain and know how he wants to respond to it, and how that will fuel our lives and give us his strength when we are weak.
Yes, so beautiful. So many beautiful things said in that. I really hope that the women watching the interview, get more insight into pain and suffering, if that's something that, you know, you're currently going through.
Mm-hmm.
There is hope, there is joy. And I love the way you said that, that where you studied in the Bible, specifically with pain, joy was there. You know, it was pain
Mm-hmm.
and it was joy. And that they're, you know, that they're both important. They're both, they go with one another. I agree with you, at least from my own journey, that you even taught me something today. Like I never thought about it that way. And in regards to the pain, like I had the pain and I never thought about like I was actually experiencing Christ. I was experiencing his pain. I never thought about it that way. And that actually just made me feel even closer to him now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I always felt like I was the bad one. I was the one that was, you know, just hurting, and he would never be that way. But to know that I share that with him, that's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
That's really powerful. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
As we close the interview, I just wondered, did you have anything else you wanted to leave with the women of the summit before we close out?
You know, I was thinking about this earlier, and, you know, I think one of the things that stood out to me in this summit is just encouraging women to be still and press into where they are at.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think that, again, if that place is a really good spot, or if that place is a really hard spot, to not be so quick to run to the next spot.
Mm.
One of the things that has been significant for me is understanding, unpacking what it means to wait on God. In the Bible, he talks often about waiting on him. And waiting on him is not like our Western culture of okay, something's going to happen, and I'm waiting right now for quarantine to lift. I'm waiting right now for, you know, when can I get out of my house? Can I go do this? All these things that we can just put our hope in. But in Eastern culture, waiting had this idea of what was happening in the waiting, this idea of this cord that is being bound together in the waiting. And so they talk about waiting on God, and it was waiting for him to come, but it also was, God, we are waiting for you. We are allowing our hearts to be bound together with you in the waiting. And so I would say in this season, whatever it is you're waiting for, whatever it is you're sitting in, to not miss what God has for you in this season that is specific to this season, because you're waiting for another season to come. And that has been true for me in singleness, of God, what are you revealing in my heart in singleness? What are you revealing in my heart in hoping for motherhood but not having it fully? What are you revealing in my heart now as I parent two little kids who are so wonderful and also very exhausting? And was, God, this is a new season for me. God, I want to not just look to when I get a break, or when my kids are in school, or I don't want to miss what you have for me in this season. Like, help me be attuned to that. And so that's what I would say to the women, to be attuned to what God has for you, and to ask him to help you wait well. That has been a prayer for my life. God, help me wait well in every season that you have me in, and help me know you in that season so that I can be bound to you more tightly as I ultimately wait for your return and wait for you to redeem this broken world.
Wow, yeah, that's really great advice. Yes, I believe that wholeheartedly, sitting still in the current season. And I agree with you. I believe he has something in this season. And when we don't sit in it, we miss it, and we need that thing. That's the thing. He knows we need it for where we're going next. And so, yeah, being in that space and just like paying attention to what it is he's doing. So powerful. Yes. Well, Lindsey, thank you so much for being a part of the summit. I really, really appreciate it. This is a great interview. So many beautiful insights. And thank you so much for sharing your story. That, you know, it's so easy for us on social media to share the good things that are going on in our life. And I just think it's so powerful that you shared such a such a tragedy, and you shared it with just complete, faith in God, and you showed people like a whole other side of Christianity.
Mm.
And that's powerful, and I believe that's why it had so much impact. And I'm just so grateful that you shared it here on the summit. Ladies of the summit, I want you to know that I will be putting a link to Lindsey's blog so you can read through the stories that she had shared today. Also, she has a book called Buried Dreams. I will include a link to that as well so you can keep in touch with Lindsey. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today, and we'll be back with another speaker tomorrow.